What's up, everybody? I'm gonna give you guys a complete rundown system of how, when, where, and what I use to throw a Storm Wiggle Wart. One of my favorite baits to fish early in the spring, a bait that was a huge key for me when I finished second place at the 2013 Bassmaster Classic at Grand Lake. And so I'm gonna dive in, talk about the Wiggle Wart, for one, what makes it so special, what line, what hooks, rod, reel. I'm gonna break everything down and tell you exactly the whole entire system, and then talk a little bit about where I like to fish this bait and when I like to fish it. So just to start off, Storm Wiggle Wart. It's been around for a long time. What makes this bait special is its action. So when this bait is running through the water, it's not gonna just come perfectly straight. It has what we call a hunting action. So as this bait's running, it's wobbling, it's rolling, all right, it's got all the different axes, but it's also hunting through the water, okay? And so it's digging, looks like a little live crawfish trying to get away or hunting around, or it may look like a little bait fish getting around, right? Bass are opportunistic feeders, so we just have to present them the opportunity. One thing that I like to do to increase my hookup ratio is swap out the treble hooks. And I use VMC 7547, that's the model number, 7547, and the size is number 6. Okay, so it's a regular shank, and the special thing about these is the shape of the hook. They stay sharp for a long time, and they're super sticky out of the package. And you may be asking yourself, why is that important? Well, a lot of times I'm fishing this bait early in the year, cold temperatures. At the Classic, when I finished second, water temps were 43, 44 degrees, and those fish weren't really active. I was just barely slow rolling, creeping this thing along the bottom, and those fish would come up and almost just suck the bait in. And you need really sharp, sticky hooks to get a hold of those fish. And these are by far the best ones that I've used to date. Little VMC snap to add to allow extra freedom of movement of that bait. And speaking of freedom of movement, let's talk about line. Okay, line is really important when it comes to this. You don't want to throw a 15 or 17 pound test because it's going to kill a lot of the action of this bait. My go-to line is a 10 pound Seagar InvizX fluorocarbon. Why? The 10 pound is super thin diameter, so it allows that freedom of movement. It's going to cut down through the water column really well, allowing this bait to get down as deep as possible. And the fluorocarbon also is a sinking line, so that's also going to help with getting that bait down. Now, when you've got the right hooks, bait, line, you got to pair it up with the right rod and the right reel. And I've messed around with a bunch of different rods, bunch of different reels, and my favorite one that I found is an Alpha Angler rebound rod. It's a 7-foot medium heavy. Now you think medium heavy sounds kind of heavy, Brandon, for 10 pound test. But this is a glass rod. So it's S2 glass, which is a structural grade glass. It's highly sensitive, very light in weight. But the cool thing about glass versus graphite is that glass gives us a parabolic bend. So I've got a very even bend from the tip all the way down into the butt section. You can see how much that rod still flexes down here. What that allows it to do is that it really allows those fish, the ones that aren't as aggressive, to come up behind the bait and really give them a chance to suck that bait in. Okay, so as they come up behind it, bait's hunting, they're tracking it, and they push it forward, it allows them to get that bait. The other thing that it allows us to do is when you're throwing treble hooks, a lot of times your landing ratio is not very good. Okay, so we get them hooked, then we got to get them to the boat, especially if it's in a tournament situation. And the worst thing you can do as an angler is allow those fish to get slack in your line. So when a fish comes up, jumps, all I do is I keep as much pressure on those fish and actually almost try to pull those fish to me with this rod, because the more bend I can keep in this rod, the harder it is for those fish to gain slack, okay? Especially when I get them next to the boat. I've got one hand up on the rod, I'm reaching down for those fish, and if that fish goes to make a surge, which they do a lot of times, especially if you're fishing smallmouth, this rod's gonna absorb that and it's gonna keep those fish pinned, which is important. You gotta pair it up with the right reel. You don't wanna be too fast, you don't wanna be too slow. I like a 6-3 to 1, right in between. It's a Daiwa Steez A, 6-3 to 1. Couple things I like about this: it's gonna cast a mile. It's mag sealed bearings, so they're gonna last a long time. I don't have to oil them all the time. And being able to cast a long ways is what's also gonna help get this bait down there. It's gonna help me stay in the strike zone longer, which is important early in the year. I want to keep this down there as long as possible, and it's gonna be super smooth, right? I'll need a reel that's really smooth so I can feel those subtle bites. And the speed of the reel, the 6-3 to 1, that's gonna be slow enough that I'm not pulling this bait away from the fish. I'm really allowing it to get down there and hunt. And it's also fast enough that when those fish come up behind it and they eat it and they knock slack in the line, I can have enough speed to pick up the line and drive the hooks into those fish. So I've got the bait, the hooks, the snap on the front, the Alpha Angler Rebound, Daiwa Steez A, 10-pound Seagar and VizX for the line. And where are we gonna fish this thing? Well, at Grand Lake, we'll use that as an example just because it was a really good tournament. What I was doing is I was looking on my graphs, and I would look for places that had deep water access coming from the main body of water leading up into those shallow flats. So even though the water temps were 43, 44 degrees, I was fishing semi-stained water and allowing those fish to use those contour lines as their contour highway, or their transitional highways, right? They're following those contour lines from that deep water, and anywhere I could find a flat that had that deep water run into those shallow flats, that's where those fish were staging up. And then I would find the brush piles, the isolated rock piles where those fish were living. Now, this bait is gonna dive on 10-pound test somewhere in that 7 to 11 foot depth range, depending on where you hold your rod tip. Higher you hold it, higher it's gonna ride in the water column. The lower you hold it, the deeper it's gonna dive. But I was actually fishing this bait shallower than that. I was fishing it in about 3 to 6 foot, but because the water temps were so cold, I was barely creeping this along, and in that 3 to 6 foot, it would maintain contact with the bottom and allow those fish to be able to suck the bait in. So super key. If you gotta fish it really slow, you can actually take this bait, fish it a little bit shallower. But if you haven't tried it, give it a try. Early in the spring, semi-stained to clear water works really well in that, 11 foot to, I'll say, 3 foot depth range. Super versatile. If you guys haven't tried it out, make sure you guys go check out the Storm Wiggle Wart and check out the complete system from yours truly.